The very thin layer of red and actually gray and black are dyed veneers. So typically, anything that's over an eighth of an inch in thickness is going to be a natural hardwood color. But some of the real thin lines in veneer ranges like anywhere from a 40th of an inch to 16th of an inch in thickness. Those can be dyed, and I use those to broaden the color spectrum a little bit. But there are bright red woods, just not quite as bright as that red veneer.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Art Dealer Diaries. For those who actually are watching this on YouTube, you can actually look and see all of Terry's work. We put it on the table, which is really kind of cool.
Excellent.
It allows you to get a sense of what we're talking about. Though I'm very interested in your art, clearly, I'm also really interested in you because I haven't had the chance to get to talk to you, really.
Well, it's pretty unlikely guy to become an artist. I was a math and science guy, and it's surprising how many people I run across who actually have some connection to the medical industry. My parents would have been delighted if I'd become a doctor, and I was pre-med in undergrad school for about 5 semesters till I discovered making things with my hands that I could sell was kind of instant gratification. So, and
that's what Terry Evans, this is Terry Evans, by the way. Yeah. And what we have is, he's a woodworker. And I almost use that as a loose term because really, I mean, you're a wood artist as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if that's degrading to say woodworker but to me, I mean, it's clearly art.
No, it's that whole conversation of art versus craft. You know, when I was an aspiring artist and a student, craft had that fine connotation. The Chihoulis were fine artisans, fine art craft. And since that time, it seems like through the decades we've gone that craft has become a bad word. People associate it with a hobby.
Right.
And certainly what I do is beyond a hobby, but I still like the term fine craft. But it was just... early on, I walked into a leather shop in Lawrence, Kansas, and just the guy was doing like harness work, fine saddlery work, but it was a high level of the leather smithing that was done in the 70s. You know, most people would call them hippie leathersmiths. And then I started doing that, and I was selling it to classmates and people in college, and I made this with my hands, and I sold it to someone.
And you were in college at that time?
I was in college at the time, and I was at a private university that kind of allowed you to design your own major. And after about 5 semesters of pre-med, I decided that my major would be craft design and retailing. So a couple of accounting courses and all the science courses behind me, and I started taking some art courses and barely scraped together enough art credits to have a degree.
So I want to back you up, though, because I want to know where you came from. Because we jumped from I'm being born to I'm in college. So, but where were you raised?
I was raised in a little town in southeast Kansas called Chautauqua, almost in the southeasternmost corner. And my dad had grown up on a farm, and his brother and parents lived fairly nearby. And he worked for B.F. Goodrich Rubber Plant about 20 miles away across the border in Oklahoma. So a part-time farmer, you know, grew up with a farm background in a town of less than 1,500 people.
And his dad was a farmer?
Yeah.
And was his dad a farmer?
No. They were probably the first of that family in the region. And so, pretty mostly living off the land. I know that there was a relative who was a stonesmith who had I know that we've chased down some bridges that he'd built, and I own a really large, about a 5-foot-long sandstone watering trough, weighs about a ton.
And this was your grandfather?
This was a cousin. This was, you know, aside from my direct lineage, but people who really worked with materials. That was the first one that I knew. And then on my mom's side, my grandfather was a finish carpenter. So there was some artisanry there.
On that was your mom's dad?
Yeah.
And so when they came to Kansas, was that turn of the century kind of time frame, or even before that?
Probably in the 20s. I would guess. My mom was born in 28, so I'm not sure how long they lived in.
Did they go, because the Dust Bowl was kind of west of that area, but did it catch that part of the country too?
They probably saw dust clouds, but they weren't covered by it as much as the plains.
Yes.
Eastern Kansas would be a little more like what you picture Missouri.
Yes,
being, some hardwoods and
right.
But then about a fourth of the way across the state, you start seeing the Flint Hills and the rolling plains. So, I went to a small high school, about 140 kids graduated from my graduating class.
And this is a town of 1,500 people?
Well, actually, my parents moved across county lines onto property that they inherited, and caused me to go to another slightly larger town with a better high school. I got a good education there and helped me get a scholarship to a small college.
And so your dad, though, he farmed and worked at the
right,
and you probably farmed too then.
Occasionally, yeah. Enough to be worried about skin issues.
Yeah.
I was on a tractor enough in the summertime that.
And did he have ideations of you taking over the ranch, or the farm?
No. I mean, it was really small acreage. With his full-time job, 10 and 20 acre fields of soybeans and running a few horses on some acreage. That was about it. We didn't have any cattle, but he wasn't full into farming. He just had the land, and
it was was that his dad's land?
It actually was his uncle's land, who had no heirs. So
I
ended up inheriting that.
And so when you were a kid, kid, like elementary school, were you interested in art?
No, I had no. I guess I was interested in making things, but I had none of that innate ability to draw. And so, being tracked through math and science curriculum and headed in that direction, I never took an art class in high school.
But you were crafty. You would make things.
Yeah, and I guess at some point I realized that being creative being able to draw wasn't a prerequisite for being creative, that there were other directions I could go with it. And so once I started, thinking about what art was and what was important in art, very early honed into the idea of originality, and inventing. The way it turned out the direction I went was really inventing a technique, and then see what could come out of it. See how where can I direct this technique in terms of making something interesting.
And were you making anything as a kid? Were you doing any woodwork stuff or building anything?
No, I mean other 4-H projects, window stops and things like that.
They count.
Poorly crafted with a parent overseeing me at the time, but not much, not really. And there's not a lot of that in my immediate family.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, my sister is 5 years younger than me, and she was ended up with a communications degree and primarily a housewife.
Yeah. Is that time frame too?
Yeah.
And so what year do you graduate from high school?
I graduated from high school in 1969.
Yeah, so that's the year of the draft for Vietnam.
It was, and then the draft lottery was the next year, I think.
Yeah,
I got a good number.
Yeah, what was your number? Do you remember?
Yeah, I have looked it up, but it's comfortably out of the zone that they drafted. I can't recall it right now.
Do you remember that day, that night when they were pulling it?
I do remember it in the dormitory room.
So you were in college at that time?
In the lobby of our dormitory. We sat around listening. Everybody in the dorm was waiting to hear their number. And small campus, somebody on the campus did draw number one. And one of the guys that was already an anti-war protester, and he got drew draft number one.
Oh, yeah.
And, I don't know how you deal with that, but I got lucky.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I had a student deferment my freshman year, and then I think the next year was the lottery, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't remember. I think it was 1969 is when they first started that thing. But you would remember more than I because you were there. But I think that's when they pulled the little pills out of the thing. Yeah. You remember that part too?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And what was the atmosphere in that dorm when they're doing that? You're all downstairs, and your lives are going to change dramatically, potentially.
Well, everybody whose number ended up high was relieved. And of course, I don't think at the time they were drawing numbers that they had any idea. They wouldn't have had an idea of how high they were
No,
going to
that's
go.
true. No, they didn't.
They just knew that the higher the better.
Right.
If you were in the upper 50%, you were good, probably. But yeah, I remember that, and probably more importantly, and I can't put my finger on the date, but I'm going to say it was 70 was Kent State, and that struck hard at every college campus.
I'm sure it did. My brother was
shocking.
Was there in college at that time.
Just we don't like this war, and we're protesting it going on, and this could be anybody.
Yes.
A relatively unknown college where 4 people died.
Yeah. And did you have a stance on the war at that time?
I wasn't an active protester. I was more interested in dating my wife.
Yeah.
I was after my sophomore year in college, we got married, and so I was a married student. Had an opportunity to travel around and do art fairs with a guy who taught ceramics at the college.
So that's an interesting thing. So and how did that happen? What was that all about?
This guy who was a ceramics professor, I'd taken an independent study in leathersmithing, and so I was hanging around this 2-person art department, and I knew that a guy named Pal Wright, who I still know to this day, was making pottery. And on weekends, he was traveling a lot of times down to Arkansas to shopping malls and selling pottery on the weekend. And I knew that he would come back from a weekend show and make an extra house payment. And that was impressive versus working in a grocery store for $2 an hour. And so I devoted my spare time and my employment to making work that I could sell at art fairs. And I'm still to this day, I think I figured up I'm in my 47th or 48th year of doing art fairs.
Wow. So, and the stuff you were making, that was the leather?
It was leather at that time.
And so you were working
belts,
with
handbags.
All tooled. And this is 1970?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was big at that time frame, especially.
I think my first art fair would have been in 72, probably the summer before I graduated. And then as I moved on and got a graduate degree and started my first teaching job.
And what was your undergraduate, though? Was that in math?
My undergraduate, I changed late in my 4 years, and we called it craft design and retailing.
Okay.
And thought I'd move like everyone else, move to Colorado and open a leather shop. And
is that really what you thought you might do?
That's what I thought I might do. I have a friend to this day who went to Colorado with me. We scouted out the place. We found some great building in Georgetown that was actually for sale for $30,000, and we had no resources in the world that we would come up with that kind of money. But looking back on it, it was just a beautiful building, 3-foot thick walls. And, so we had this dream, but in the meantime, reality set in, and a team of recruiters for a government program called Teacher Corps came through, and I interviewed and was invited to participate in Teacher Corps. So I went down the road about an hour and a half to Emporia State University, and I taught at a little town of Burlington, Kansas. So essentially, Teacher Corps means you're going to be a student teacher for 2 years, and at the end of that, you've done the work to complete a graduate degree in education. So.
And this is like 72 to 74?
75 was when I finished that up, and then I hired in at Augusta, Kansas as an art teacher. Taught there for 11 years. And then oddly enough, my college professor had been squeezed out of education and of the college he was at, the college I graduated from, and found a higher paying job in public education at a high school in suburban Kansas City. And he was at a relatively new campus, and they were just ready to expand from 2 art teachers to 3. And he gave me a call, and so I made that transition, moved to the Kansas City metro area, and I taught there for 20 years.
And so before that, you taught 8 years?
About 11.
And where was that? That was
in a little town of Augusta, Kansas, outside of Wichita.
And what were you teaching?
I taught, for most of that time, I was the entire visual arts program for a high school of 400 or 500 kids.
Pretty big, actually.
Yeah, and as it got a little bit bigger, we moved in another teacher to cover drawing and painting, which I was woefully deficient at, but faked my way through it nevertheless. But I was really involved in the crafts, and I had a ceramic metalsmithing sculpture studio that was conveniently located right next door to the technical departments with auto mechanics, wood shop, metalsmithing. So I tried to make good friends there.
Were you making any of this wood material? Yep, yourself?
In the time I was teaching there, I started making inlaid wood belt buckles. And
did you sign them?
I did. I find some on eBay from time to time now. I've actually purchased a few back. Yeah.
And how are they signed?
They're signed with my name, Terry L. Evans, and usually a year and what number that buckle was in the sequence for that year.
Were they Native American-like design elements? Or
at the time, there was a group of artisans out of Albuquerque, for the most part, not Native Americans, but they were doing, you may be familiar with Kenneth Reed buckles. It was kind of a big production thing out of Albuquerque at the time. And so they were, that company and various people who spun off from it, I guess were my competition, but I was never producing at a level that would be competitive with them. I mean, I had some local leathersmiths who sold them for me, and I sold them on my own. At
and these were wood buckles?
Wood inlaid. So I fabricated my form, sometimes with a frame soldered onto a brass plate. Sometimes you just see all wood and it's glued to a brass backing plate with the findings for a buckle on it. So not wearing one today, so, unfortunately.
And you started doing that after you had been working for 11 years as a visual arts guy?
I started during that time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how long did you do
used
that?
The studio at the school to do that.
Yeah.
I probably made buckles up through the early 80s.
So a long time. So you made a lot of buckles.
And some of those, I was making, in the big years, 400 to 500 a year.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And the very first laminated boxes that resulted in what I'm doing now, I still have a few of them. They were discarded buckle blanks. I would make the buckles about 3 by 7 and get 2 buckles out of each blank with room to spare. So some of those were discarded for various design reasons. I saved them up, and sometime I'll do something with those. And they're only about 1/4 inch thick, so once I had enough to laminate a block, I did a little bandsawn box out of it and developed that process through a few years, and eventually decided, simultaneously I was making inlaid jewelry boxes that were traditional 4-sided boxes with a hinged lid, but with either a landscape inlay in the top, or I would do some inlays I would refer to as very much in the line of one of the styles of Kandinsky. Lots of geometric patterns overlapping one another, and so some of them would have several hundred pieces of wood in them.
Did you sign those as well?
Not typically.
How come?
Well,
you signed the buckles, but not the harder work.
Well, I came on to the opinion that I thought they were so distinctive in style that they took the Asian approach that they don't sign the work. And literally, I had someone in my booth at a show last year, and they said, "I have one of your boxes sitting on my coffee table." He brought it back the next day for me to sign. I opened it up and I signed it under the lid, and I turned it over, and it was already signed on the bottom. So
by you?
Yeah, and it had a year, so I had a great reference, 2009. And it was a wood that I was worried about fading, and it looked pristine.
What was the wood? Do you remember?
Bloodwood. Redwoods are always a little troublesome, and bloodwood is the one redwood that will hold its color fairly well.
Interesting.
And this one looked brand new.
And that was made in 2009. So
yeah, it was 10 years old.
10 years old.
And,
so after you leave the 11-year stint, you went to a college then?
Actually, public school, but much bigger public school.
And that was in
Olathe, Kansas, suburb outside of Kansas City. So the school, I don't know, 1,200 to 1,500
Oh yeah,
kids,
a real big school.
10 through 12.
And what was your position?
My position was catch every art course that the other two senior teachers didn't want to teach. So about from the very beginning, I was recruited, and my former professor knew that I could handle jewelry and some sculptural things. So I was teaching those media, but also design, commercial design, and a lot of photography, which was brand new to me.
Oh, interesting. How'd you get into that? Just because no one wanted to do it, and they said, "Okay,
well,
you got to do it."
The demand was so great that the woman who had been teaching photography also had other duties, so she could only teach about half of the day in photography, and the lab was going to be full. If there were people to teach it, it was going to be full every period of the day. So from the very beginning, I taught about half of my teaching load was photography, and then eventually over many years and movement of various faculty members, I just chose to teach photography full time, and that was about the last 10 years of my teaching.
And you did this 20 years at this?
I did 20 years at that school.
And did you have a dark room and all that?
Yeah. I went through and we maintained a dark room. I left in 2006, and we maintained a dark room up through that time period, but the handwriting was on the wall. We were doing enough digital photography that I don't know, 2 or 3 years after I left, they did away with the wet lab and went fully digital. But I maintained that balance and immersing myself in digital photography, being totally computer illiterate. So that was the scary thing, was that, I've got to get on a keyboard and do all this stuff, which everybody had to learn anyway at that time, but that was just my pathway into computers.
And did you show your photography, like in a gallery or any of that kind of stuff, your own photography?
Not really. I always had the view that teachers should be active in what they do. And I also had a lot of interest in folk music. So my involvement in photography was shooting performance. So I've had a few things published, covered a few music festivals, and then was involved in a group in Kansas City that brought in folk music. So I was doing that level of photography, and that was probably the deepest that I was involved in photography professionally. As I got closer to retirement from teaching, or the possibility of that, I started doing senior pictures and some portraiture, and weddings was sort of my B plan if art didn't work out, if I needed to
raise a little
another
more
gig on the weekend. And it turns out I never really had to do that. I probably shot 8 or 10 weddings just, in learning how to do it and figuring out how badly do I want to do this.
Yeah, how bad do I need the money? Well, so you worked as a teacher, art teacher for almost 40 years?
33 years total, including my 2 years in teacher corps.
And so, it's very interesting. I'm a firm believer that we need good teachers to teach in high school, junior high, and grade school, art teachers. And it's really being marginalized horribly. What kind of things did you see that you were able to do for children in that 33-year period of time?
We did end up with a lot of kids coming into photography who had fine art credit that they had to satisfy. And we only had 2 one-semester classes, basic photography, advanced photography, semester long. And I did start a photojournalism program in which I had the opportunity to interview and recruit kids who had completed those courses, who could do the publications work for the school newspaper and yearbook. And that was a great opportunity to develop some relationships with kids, because one semester or a year of contact with kids, I just felt like other teachers were teaching things where they were able to maintain relationships with kids. And I still consider some of those folks that worked with me in that to be some of the best kids I worked with, and have gone on to have good lives. Unfortunately, a number of them went into photojournalism and found themselves in a field that was quickly shrinking.
Yes,
as newspapers started to lay off their staff. But I'm sure in some way that's it's enriched their lives and formed the way that they've lived their lives, I hope.
And are some of the people that you taught, are they working as professional artists? Do you know?
Yeah. As a one that I'm in touch with, keep tracks of him on Facebook, is a guy named Kyle Johnson, who's he's out in L.A. now, and he does a lot of installation work for the Getty Museum.
Wow.
Has sold work to Steve Martin. He's had some nice shows of his work, made some nice contacts up there. And a very personal kid, and one of the rare, maybe 8 to 10 kids that I've worked with through my life have actually worked in my shop with me, come and worked as helpers, and he worked for me on an occasion in my shop. I hope I had some effect on him.
And so the Kyle Martin, and what kind of
Kyle Johnson?
Johnson, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What kind of art does he make?
He makes his media primarily is cardboard.
Mm-hmm.
He makes sculptural work in cardboard, installation work with cardboard. One of the Getty Museum was having an Egyptian show, and he made this cardboard sarcophagus for them that was part of their entry into the show.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's the one Steve bought.
I don't think so.
Walk like an Egyptian.
But I'm watching people work in impermanent media. I'm not sure that I buy into that.
Though it's all that way, right?
Is.
I mean, even
it
your
is.
wood.
Yeah.
You put it on a wrong table where the termites come, and it's gone too.
Yeah, but he's making it work for himself.
Yeah. Well, it seems like there's a group of kids that are just lost in school that have these great creative bents that are all, right-sided brain function, and they feel like they're stupid and dumb because they can't do the math or science or whatever, but they're incredibly gifted in the fields of art and crafts.
Yeah, there are a lot of those kids, and sometimes maybe the function of an understanding art teacher is just to help nurture them through, make sure that they actually hang with it long enough to get through high school and become a young adult and be able to make some decisions that will help them in life. I know it was always difficult for me to encourage kids to go to an art institute because to me those were so overpriced, and I thought they got a more practical experience at a good public university that had a good art program. But the Kansas City Art Institute is top notch in that field, so we have a lot of kids who ended up there.
Kids you taught?
Yeah.
So once you actually finished working as a teacher, what year was this?
06.
And so you don't want to do wedding photography if you can't.
Not if I can help it.
You're doing your woodwork. I assume you're doing woodworking at that time and making primarily the jewelry boxes.
I actually was pretty much into these laminated forms by then.
Okay.
Yeah, this form of vessels in the box that you see, that's pretty much a style I was doing at that time.
And were you doing it that modern right off the crack? I consider it a very modern sensibility.
Yeah, once I started doing them, I mean, what I was real interested in terms of the materials was finding a really wide range of colors in woods. And contrast is extremely important in all the pieces that I make. So putting light woods against dark woods and figuring out how to laminate these pieces together. And
is part of that color theory from your school days?
Not necessarily. I guess intuitive that, things pop when they have great contrast. So I wasn't interested in subtleties. I was interested in pieces that really grabbed your eye visually right away. And with the woods, it's not like you can mix a color palette. You have to, chase down the woods that have the colors. But you find from time to time, you'll find some woods that almost lean towards a blue color or green color, things that you don't normally associate with wood.
And so all the woods that are in your pieces, they're all natural woods. They haven't been dyed or colored at all?
I use dyed veneers. So if I can show you on this piece.
So those who are just listening to this, we're pulling off the top of a piece and we're looking at some of the inlay.
The very
veneer.
Thin layer of red and actually gray and black are dyed veneers.
I see.
So typically anything that's over an eighth of an inch in thickness is going to be a natural hardwood color. but some of the real thin lines and veneer ranges like anywhere from a 40th of an inch to 16th of an inch in thickness. Those can be dyed, and I use those to broaden the color spectrum a little bit. But there are bright red woods, just not quite as bright as that red veneer.
And how many colors will you typically use in a piece?
I don't assess it. It's very intuitive. I put layers together, and I actually, maybe just there are probably between 25 and 30 layers of wood in that, I'm going to guess, by the time we count every veneer.
So I encourage people who have a chance, look on YouTube, and you'll also get to see the objects that we're touching. But so when you do a piece, and you have kind of certain forms that you clearly like,
right.
And they're all a little different, some quite different. When you decide to make something, how do you determine which form that you're going to make?
Well, the basic beginning of a piece is boards that range about 3 1/4 inch in width. They're stacked up and laminated, and I'll typically do them around 18 inches long, although shorter or longer can always be the case. But I can spend a week just laminating, or 2 weeks longer, just laminating up those billets or stacks of wood and have them as inventory. I can either predetermine I'm going to use these woods and do a particular piece, or I can just look at the inventory and say, well, I can make 2 pieces from that, or 1 long piece from it, or actually a stacking piece that's 5 inches wide and 12 inches tall.
And so as part of that, determining what you have as far as wood inventory on hand, because that kind of changes depending. You don't have endless amounts of different types of wood.
And in a box, in these boxes, all have lids. In a box, to me, the stars are whatever's on the top of the box and the 2 woods on the outside. So that's sort of which usually the sides usually are made to contrast each other. A medium or a light toned side versus a really dark side.
And these are all functional. You make these to be functional boxes, right?
They are functional boxes, and people ask me what for, and I say that's irrelevant.
It's up to you. My fishing lures.
I don't make them to hold a particular thing, but they have spaces inside them. Usually awkward spaces, never quite the right size for a business card or this or that. But then people say, oh, well, I would display that with the lid off of it. Well, now it's perfect for a business card.
And do you people try, because you do these fairs, and you've done a lot of fairs, and I'm sure you must have people, can you make me this kind of form?
I always turn away custom work.
I would assume.
I actually, I say that without exception. I'm making a piece like this one I'm making as a custom piece for a very good client in Kansas City, but only because it fits within my format, and I can get easy approval from him on the various steps. But it's so seldom that I will relent. I've found that when I do that, it just breaks into the workflow and becomes, even it's something that I would enjoy making on my own as a speculative piece, now I'm making it for someone, and it's reporting to a job and doing that job.
Right.
So it's less fun.
You're retired.
Yeah.
But do you feel like you're retired? I mean, because you're really producing great. I mean, you're working full time, right?
No. And, when people, at any point in my career, whether I was teaching or not, people look at this work and refer to it as a hobby. I wince a little bit. I try not to bristle. I just let them know it's not a hobby.
Yeah, well, if you look at your resume, too, you have many, many museums that your work has been exhibited in. It's been in major woodworking books.
Yeah, and, it's just, it is what gets me up in the morning. Whether I'm going to the shop or whether I'm just on the internet or dealing with a veneer company getting things ordered for the future, I'm probably going to be dealing with something that affects my studio production during just about every day. And it's, I've seen many teachers retire early and not last that long. I think having the drive to do something, I can't imagine retiring and not having anything to do.
Right. Well, and you've been, quite frankly, been doing this since you were a teenager as far as making art.
Pretty close.
And actually making and selling art.
Yeah, there's just a wild gratification of I made this, and I'm directly selling it to the person who appreciates it enough to pay me for it. It's
Yes.
just amazing.
Well, when I met you, just, I mean, a little background on our history, I went to the Cherry Creek, I don't know what they call it, Cherry Creek
Arts Festival.
And that's July 4th, I think.
Mm-hmm.
First time I've ever been to that, actually. And it was fantastic. There's about 200 exhibitors, a wide variety of artists there. It's all artists. And you stood out to me like a sore thumb. I mean, it was like so, in a good way. So it was so clearly original voice and different and art that when I saw it, I immediately said, it just didn't take me. And that's generally how it is. It didn't take me but a few seconds to go, my God, I'd love to have this guy in my gallery.
Well, in our conversation, just felt like it was a good place where we were going. So, you're not the first gallery owner that's been in my booth that wanted the work. And at this point, I usually have held most of my work for art fairs, but we're cutting down on the number of art fairs. They're more difficult to market through. And when you actually weigh all of the costs involved, we may be better off selling through gallery and letting somebody who actually promotes and sells work better than I do, get it to the public.
Yeah, no, I remember your face. It was like, I could tell there was a hesitancy when I said, I would really show your work. I mean, I would represent you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your thought is, okay, who is this guy and what rinky-dink little gallery does he have?
No, I mean, I listen to all of those.
Yes.
And I never know when the opportunity is going to come along.
Yes.
That's the right one. And we just need to be in the right demographic where people are going to buy into an original contemporary art form and love it.
Yeah.
So,
well, and also you do these sculptures. That's what to me, they're just pure sculptures and they're fantastic.
Yep.
In some respects, I like them the most of everything, especially we have some that you can see again on YouTube, but you've done some very large ones as well.
I've finished one really large scale one. I had one, I think, when you were in my booth at Cherry Creek. I'm not sure of the timing, but I did sell one about twice the size of the two that we have on the table.
Yeah, no, there was a very large one there.
And another aspect, I've had a phone call. I had a second chance to sell that piece within the last few weeks. So hopefully I can return to Cherry Creek and that guy will find me.
Yes, and I highly encourage people to go there, and if they can't, then you just go to Medicine Gallery, and we'll make sure it happens. But tell me about these sculptures, because they're different. They have this almost, I don't know, Kandinsky kind of sensibility to laid down in wood.
I had some ideas to do some wall pieces, and I had some blocks laminated up for that, and probably tucked away on a shelf for 2 or 3 years. And it just so happened that I had these large tapered vessels that attached to a base that filled a particular space in my booth. And 3 or 4 years ago at Cherry Creek, I had carried a couple of these vessels around for a lot of years. And within the space of a few months, I sold both of them. And I had a custom-made window in my booth with nothing to put in it and a show about 3 weeks later.
Right.
And I've got those pieces laminated. Those are going to become vertical sculptures. They were originally going to be horizontal and hung on a wall, and now I'm going to do something different. And so the next show we went to was in Crested Butte, Colorado, and I sold one there.
And do you have an idea, of what the form is going to be when you start it, or is it kind of just like a potter making pottery? The form just determines it.
At this point, there's a certain formulaic quality to the way that I'm working with them. If you're able to see these, I'm finding the ones that people really respond to are the ones with a lot of space in them. This one we're looking at with 4 stones that bring the two halves of the sculpture together.
Right, and so for those who are just listening, so these are they're about 28 inches tall, and you have 2 just intricately designed laminated pieces of wood with these river rock kind of design elements in between them. It's almost, they have this amorphic sensibility to me, like, like lovers, really, quite frankly.
I resisted the idea of them being figurative, but as important as and influential as the work of Henry Moore has been on me, I can't really deny that. Almost had an argument with a fellow art fair exhibitor who's been a longtime friend, and he said, well, made a reference to them obviously being figurative, and I said, well, those aren't figurative, and he just laughed and walked away, and I said, yeah, he's right, they're figurative.
They're totally figurative. I mean, yeah, and I see the Henry Moore for sure.
Yeah. And incidentally, we have the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City has the biggest Moore collection inside and outside out of England, and so we see that. We can see it anytime we want because we can walk on the campus on Sunday morning and walk through Henry Moore sculptures. So
it's important to do, don't you think? Is to be able to see those kind of things in art museums.
I even studied a little of his background, that he was a young guy who decided very early on that he was going to go to the Academy of Art and become a sculptor, and just proceed to become one of the most respected contemporary sculptors of the 20th century. Yeah. His work is just excellent. I love to see it anytime I can.
Yeah, I see it now that when you mention it, because I've always been a Moore fan. I'm sure there must be some of that makes me gravitate toward these. And do they take the same amount of time as one of your boxes?
They do. There's a lot of laminating and joining. The boxes are a bit of a formula to get the solid block ready to start cutting apart. These are more intuitive, judgmental. You have to decide where to put wood and what areas you're going to save and what areas you're going to cut away. So there's a lot of that to it. And still, I've made hundreds of boxes. I've made a couple of dozen sculptures at this point. So, streamlining them and figuring out quicker ways to do things in the future.
Each one is kind of a one of one?
Oh, they will be.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I will repeat pieces that have these stones in the middle of them, but there'll be different woods, different proportions of pieces on them. I try to make them interesting on the front side and the back side. So that ideally they'd be displayed in the round on a coffee table or a dining table. Or if they're on a mantle, then you can turn them around.
Right.
And have a different piece from time to time.
And what's the biggest one you've done?
I have one that's about 5.5 feet, finished at home. Then these pieces, like you said, are around a little over 2 feet. And then there's a size I do, I think 43 inches was the piece that was in my booth at Cherry Creek.
I think I even had that discussion with you at that time, saying I think really doing these very large would be incredible.
The first, I have I glued 3 armatures, 4 large pieces, finished one of those. And that I had to call my wife to the shop to have her help me put it through the bandsaw. It's
good.
It's a heavy piece and hard to manage, and there are some things to work out in terms of process and when to do what when they get really large. But it's pushing. The next step, if I want to go larger, is to do them in modular pieces that can be joined together. I have considered the real possibility and probability that I'll do these as single-sided wall pieces as well. Hang them horizontally or vertically.
Yeah, I think those would be very successful.
I think they could be.
Yeah. Well, it gives people a different sensibility to it. Some people have a harder time, I think, with sculpture.
Yep.
And everyone thinks you can always put something on the wall and they understand it.
Yeah.
And also, I think they would translate quite well.
Yeah, I can see that happening.
And so when you come up with something like this, was it by accident, really, or was it just that empty space that needed to be filled?
It was that empty space that needed to be filled, and the fact that I already had some laminated pieces ready that I could just, I think I had about a half a dozen of them ready that I could just produce right into it, and they've been well received. I've done some art fairs where I've sold 2 or 3. Occasionally I hit an art fair, and that's just not the thing that's appealing to people, but that just means the right person didn't come through your booth that
Or
weekend.
maybe in the where you are too. I would
Yeah.
think the people that deal have more modern homes and things probably.
Right.
So West
Right.
Coast, East Coast might do better than Tennessee or somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Though I don't know that for a
So-
fact. You would know because you've done them.
You know, my problem is I haven't repeated fairs enough. Like somebody who didn't have a teaching career and has had an opportunity to do a show and do shows in Florida every season for 10 years
Right.
can figure that out. But you know, I'm stuck to just a handful of fairly successful shows that I do, and I'm more down to just the decision that, you know, if something didn't sell, those people weren't here this weekend. So
Yeah.
you
Well,
know.
and I think that's the thing about a gallery. The gallery gives you massive exposure.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, tens of thousands of people will see your work that may not have, and potentially even in a couple of days they might see it. Then, you know,
Well, and they're people who are looking for art and not just stumbling on an art fair
Right.
because a particular musician is on
Right.
the open stage at a particular time.
I didn't
So-
care about any of that. I was
Right.
only interested in the art. I
Right.
didn't listen to any of the
Right.
musicians. And so, do you see yourself going, let me see what else I can do? I made these. Is there another thing I want to try?
Well, the sculptures and the still tabled idea of translating that to wall pieces are still fairly new for me. I mean, it's I guess I develop at a certain pace, probably based on the fact that I was in the classroom for 30 years. So I'm thinking the first sculptures were either three or 4 years ago. So they're still in my progression and evolution. They're still pretty early. So I think I want to do more large ones, see how that works out, work out the details for them. But I think they're. I've been looking for the transition. I make boxes that I think are fine art, but the fact that they're boxes,
Pigeonholes you.
yeah, it makes it a craft.
Yes.
A craft in a bad way. So moving totally away from something that's functional, I've kind of known that was an important direction to go for a long time. And so the sculptures have provided that outlet. And so I don't know. And I'm not, I know that big is important. People love to see big work, and I don't know how much bigger I'm going to go other than about, you know, human size, 5 or 6 feet tall.
Right. Just from the physicality standpoint.
Well, and even the idea that I'm still locked into the art show idea, I've got to get it in my minivan so I could haul it to the art fair.
All those can come to Medicine Man Gallery.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
single one of those.
Yeah,
You will
so-
call art handlers. They can come pick it up, and
Right.
you don't have to do jack.
Right.
So
Okay.
don't let that one get in your way because it's got to go in your minivan. Because quite frankly, it doesn't.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's it's interesting to see how potentially a gallery representation can change the trajectory of an artist, and just even the right gallery, getting hooked into the right
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And that's the gallery owner knowing that it's a fit.
That's number one.
The artist doesn't know.
No, they don't.
You
Right.
know, I've approached galleries from Santa Fe to Asheville, North Carolina, and it's like they're just not interested. And I think it's the whole thing. You didn't approach the right person at the right time, and
Right. They didn't get it.
And they're being approached by multiple people per day, and they're a little bit tired of it. You know, the fatigue means that they're not even going to give a close look to it, because a gallery I approached in Asheville had people in their room of specifically wood art who I've been in museum shows with. You know, but no conversation.
Yeah, and sometimes I think that's the gallerist's issues. That
Yeah.
they don't. If you're a good gallerist, you take the time to look and evaluate everything.
Yeah.
Regardless of how tired you are or how many people you have.
Yeah.
I had somebody I represent, Greg Campbell, who's a woodworker, who came to Santa Fe and showed me his work. And he was so gratified that I would take the time to look at it. He goes, everybody won't even look at my stuff. He goes, I can't believe it. And I said, well, not only will I look at it, I'm going to represent you.
Yeah.
And, I've represented him for 20 years or so. And it was it has been extremely successful. Of course, now there's other galleries in Santa Fe that desperately want his work,
Yeah.
because they just didn't take the time or effort or energy or, just
Right.
because you may deal in one area doesn't mean that you can't handle another area.
Right.
And for me, it was clearly fit what I thought I could sell and what I like. That's really it. It comes down to me.
Of course.
If I like the aesthetics and the person to some extent, but that's what's going to be the determiner.
Well,
period. Because if I like it, I should be able to.
You're the guy,
place
and you have the staff, and if you're enthusiastic about it, I mean, I already came in the gallery before you arrived. The staff seem to already know about the work, and they're enthusiastic about it, and so I think we're going to have a good relationship.
Yeah. Well, the funniest thing was my wife seeing your work. I don't know if it was an email or something, and she sent me this email and forwarded it to me. He says, "You really need to look at this guy. I think he would be great for the gallery."
Very
and I
good.
said,
Very
"That's
good.
the guy I asked to come to join me." You know, she wasn't at that show with me, so clearly she gets it as well.
Yep.
Anything you want to add to the world of art? You know, final statements. Yeah, I mean, you know, you've done a lot of things actually in your life.
I have. I just no, just keep making the woodwork.
Do you have an Instagram account?
I don't yet.
Okay.
But
we'll make sure he gets one out there so you guys can like it.
we've
Otherwise, you can see it on ours because we'll put it up under our Instagram.
I do have a social media specialist in the family who may go on my payroll here sometime soon.
I think it's important, actually. Yeah, to get the word out there. Because you can only, and of course, literally, you can only produce so much in a year.
I do. Actually, you have all of my sculpture at the moment, and my next commitment is in April. So I have a great winter ahead in Kansas City. So sculpture's underway, but other than the large sculpture that I have kind of set aside for a local collector, this is it at the moment. So
well, I mean,
if you sell it fast, there will be a wait.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and it took us 6 months basically to get this material.
Yeah.
And you told me that at that time, that it's not going to happen immediately, and, you know, give me a chance to catch my breath.
And I felt like you were putting an offer to represent me on the table, and there was no pressure. So,
there was no pressure. Yeah.
Great.
Well, what I want from an artist, any artist, is I hopefully want their best work that they're happiest with. I don't want to tell them what to make. I don't think it's, you know, they're going to produce the things that they like, and if they like it, then everyone's going to like it.
I'm at this point, I'm feeling like I have such a history making vessels. I would have a hard time giving it up, but I think that the sculptures are my most important work. So,
I agree.
So I'm not sure how that's going to shake out. I know that blocks that have been laminated for vessels can become parts of sculptures, so who knows?
Well,
what the proportion will be. But
it seems like making those gives you almost more of a creative outlet than the boxes. I don't know if that's true, but it seems from what you're saying.
Yeah, and you know, the boxes are certainly sculptural, but they do lock you into that idea of providing a space and a lid.
Yes. Or make a sculpture that is a box.
You know, that or a small hidden compartment.
Yeah,
or something
exactly.
Like that. Yeah,
that would be very cool.
Happen.
Yeah, I can see that being very interesting. Well, they're beautiful.
Well, thank you.
And I'm so thrilled to have you in the gallery. I'm glad you drove them all out here from Kansas today. He's only here for one day and kind enough to take the time to do the interview as well. And we're also going to put a video up that we had interviewed and talking about the pieces themselves that people can watch on YouTube as well. In case you're listening to this only, I highly encourage you to go see Terry's work on YouTube on our channel. And we have stuff available now.
Okay.
So hopefully when it runs out, we'll be, come by next year. We'll have something. Terry, thank you so much. It was really nice
Mark.
having you on Art Dealer Diaries.
Really
and we're thrilled to have you as our newest artist in Medicine Man. Thank you. Bye-bye. We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.